The cold tile floor unexpectedly turned soft and sticky beneath Jess's feet as, wrapped in a thick towel, she wiped the steam from the mirror with her palm. What she saw there made her gasp, not from the humid air of the bathroom, but from the bone-chilling terror that ran through her. Jess stood under the hot streams of water, enjoying the way the steam enveloped her skin. It had been a long day, and these few minutes were her personal sanctuary. Suddenly, through the sound of the water, she caught a sound that shouldn't be there. Tuk, tuk, tuk. It wasn't a knock on the door. The sound was quiet, rhythmic, and seemed to come from inside the walls. Light, quick taps on the tile, as if someone was gently knocking with a fingernail or a small knuckle from the outside. Jess turned off the water and the silence in the bathroom became deafening. Tuk, 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 tuk. Now she was certain. Someone was there. In the hallway. She lived alone in a fifth-floor apartment. Neighbors wouldn't be tapping the wall so strangely. Her heart beat faster. She grabbed the towel and, without drying off, stepped toward the door, listening. The tapping stopped. Jess slowly turned to the foggy mirror. She meant to just wipe away the steam to see her reflection, but her hand froze halfway. Right in the center of the mirror, on the perfectly even mist of condensation, a message had been traced with a finger. Next time, check the vent. Jess recoiled, hitting her back against the wall. This couldn't be a joke. The message was fresh. Beads of water were running down the letters. She was alone in the bathroom. How? Her gaze darted upwards to the ceiling, right above her head. Where the exhaust fan usually hummed unnoticed, the grill was ajar. It wasn't completely removed, but one corner was noticeably sticking out. The twist. Jess dressed in a rush, never taking her eyes off the vent. She grabbed her father's flashlight from the dresser and pulled up a chair to reach. Her hands were trembling as she pulled the grill down. Inside the dusty, narrow passage, it was empty. No hands, no eyes, no trace of anyone, just old clogged dust. She let out a sigh of relief, but then her eyes fell on the edge of the inner side of the grill, the part facing the ceiling. Tucked in the corner where the grill attached to the plastic vent housing was a tiny, surprisingly modern device the size of a coin. It was a miniature camera with a microphone connected to a thin, nearly invisible wire that ran deeper into the wall. Jess felt her legs give way. Someone wasn't just watching her from a neighboring apartment or the attic. She ripped out the camera, snapping the wire. She held the tiny lens in her hand when she realized why the knock was on the tile, not the door. Her gaze flew to the door, then to the window. The camera was pointing down, and the message on the mirror was written at eye level. The observer hadn't written on the mirror. She looked up at the ceiling again and, aiming the flashlight, shone it on the plaster. In the dim light, she saw a faint mark on the ceiling whitewash, right next to the vent. A greasy fingerprint, but this finger wasn't just dirty. It was too large, almost like a gorilla's finger. And it wasn't the only one. Nearby were other, smaller prints, resembling children's handprints. Jess looked at the bathroom floor. The tile was cold and clean. But then she remembered the sensation under her feet when she wiped the steam from the mirror. The cold tile floor unexpectedly turned soft and sticky beneath Jess's feet. She looked down. In the flashlight's beam, the tile looked normal, but when she crouched, she saw it. Not sticky, wet, not from steam. On the floor, a thin, almost invisible layer of viscous liquid was spread. Not water, it had a sweet, salty smell, and it was slowly seeping out from under the bathtub, leaving tiny, damp tracks. Tracks of bare, small feet. Children's feet. Jess slowly stood up. She understood. The message on the mirror was written by her own reflection, which the camera saw somewhere, and the tapping on the tile was just a diversion to make her look up. The observer, or observers, were not in the ventilation. They were beneath the floor. She felt a chill run up her legs. Tuk, 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 tuk. The tapping returned. Now it was from under the floor. But this time it wasn't on tile, it was on wood. Jess snatched up her phone in a panic to call the police, but in the next second, the bathroom light went out. The floor beneath her feet creaked ominously, and she heard the hissing sound of the vent, which was now fully open. Behind her, the light in the bathroom went out, plunging Jess into absolute humid darkness. The cracking of the floor beneath her feet grew louder, turning into an ominous groan. It was the sound of old joists giving way under sudden stress, or worse, something pushing up from below. Took, 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 took. The tapping from under the floor was no longer just rhythmic. It sounded purposeful, as if someone was testing where the floor was thinnest, or trying to punch through it at a specific spot. Jess pressed herself against the door, frantically fumbling for her phone in the pocket of her wet towel. She dialed 911, but before she could raise the phone to her ear, she heard a hissing sound behind her by the ceiling. The vent cover, which she had left slightly open, now swung wide. The grill clattered onto the tile. From the black maw of the ventilation shaft came a sharp, dry gasp. It was too loud for a normal person and too raspy. Jess violently jerked the doorknob. It was locked. No, she whispered, trying to remember. She never locked this door. There was no key in the lock. The door was being held from the inside by something heavy propped against it. The phone she clutched began to vibrate with the emergency service call. "Please, help," she yelled into the darkness. "Someone's here. They're under the floor and in the vent. My door is blocked." She heard the distressed voice of the operator on the other end, but at that moment, the sound from the vent drowned out her scream. Something white extended from the hole, like a long, thin stalk. It moved slowly, testing the air. It wasn't a hand. It was a piece of thick white fabric, possibly a bandage or a sleeve. It was wet and stained with grime. As Jess watched the stalk in terror, the floor beneath her sighed. In the center of the bathroom, right where she had just been standing, the tile began to crack. A thin fissure ran from a corner across the tile and split into two. Then, with a sound like a bandage being ripped off, a piece of the tile lifted. Beneath it wasn't earth or wooden joists. It was black, viscous mud, and something was writhing in that mud. From the crack in the floor emerged a tiny, blood-stained fist. Jess was speechless. It was the hand of an infant or a very small child. It was smeared with that same wet, sweet, salty liquid. The small hand slowly turned, and 1, 2, then 3 grimy fingers gripped the edge of the lifted tile. The floor cracked again and the fissure widened. Meanwhile, from the vent, the white stalk wrapped itself around the light bulb above Jess's head and yanked hard. The glass bulb shattered on the tile, and the last remnants of light disappeared. Jess was left in total darkness. She heard a squelching sound as something small and wet crawled out of the crack in the floor, and then she felt it. A small cold impact on her ankle. Something tiny had grabbed her leg. She screamed, dropping the phone. The sound of the falling phone and the operator's voice in it were drowned out by a second, louder crack in the floor. "This is just the beginning." A dry, emotionless voice whispered right above her from the ventilation shaft. "You will see what we made them do." Jess looked up, seeing nothing but absolute darkness. But she felt it. Cold, wet breath descended from above. She lunged for the door and, using all her strength and adrenaline, kicked the spot where she felt the blockage. The wood cracked. She kicked again. The door burst open with a crash and Jess tumbled out into the lit hallway. She was gasping, her ankle burned, and her hand bore a smear of dirt and possibly teeth marks. She looked back at the bathroom. The door was open. Inside, pitch darkness. But from that darkness, trailing across the clean white tile, were damp, brown tracks, the tracks of small crawling things. She ran for the front door but stopped. She couldn't just leave. She had to see what it was. Steeling herself, she grabbed the front door key, dashed onto the balcony and screamed, "Help! Call the police immediately." She ran back into the corridor, and without turning on the bathroom light, bent down. The damp tracks led not just out of the bathroom, but along the hallway wall, straight toward her bedroom. She saw it. At the end of the corridor, by the slightly open bedroom door, two tiny glowing eyes stared at her from the shadows. And then she heard a new sound. A sound that made her blood run cold. It was a final knock, but it didn't come from the walls or the floor. It came from inside the closet in her bedroom, knocking on wood from the inside. The glowing eyes in the bedroom darkness and the escalating thudding from the closet tore the last scream from Jess. She stumbled back into the hallway, trying to retreat, but her legs buckled. She knew those eyes, those sticky trails, that child's fist. It was all a trap, created by the one who spoke from the vent. You will see what we made them do. But who were they? Jess crawled to the kitchen drawer, grabbed the biggest knife she could find, and barely breathing headed toward the bedroom. The glowing eyes were gone. On the floor by the door was only a pool of viscous grime leading into the darkness. Tuck, tuck. Boom, the thudding from the closet stopped. It was replaced by a loud, wet choke that seemed to emanate from directly beneath the wardrobe. Jess slowly opened the bedroom door. She flipped the light switch. She saw the closet. It was closed. There were no tracks on the floor in front of it. The grime, wet and viscous, covered only the edge of the rug near the entrance in a heavy, glistening layer. Jess, trembling, approached the closet, holding the knife in front of her. She took a deep breath and yanked the door open. The closet was empty. No chokes, no thuds, no signs, only her old clothes. With relief mixed with total confusion, she lowered the knife. The unexpected conclusion, at that moment a sharp, insistent knock came at the front door. Jess rushed to the people but stopped, remembering all the horror she had just experienced. She slowly looked at the phone screen she'd picked up in the hallway. There was a notification, missed call 911. She looked through the peephole. Standing on the doorstep was her neighbor, an elderly man, Mr. Patrick. Next to him was a police officer in uniform. Jess quickly opened the door. "Jess, what happened?" asked Mr. Patrick. "I heard screaming, and then you were yelling from the balcony. I called the police. They were here, in the vent under the floor," Jess gasped, pointing to the bathroom door. "They left a message on the mirror and set up a camera." The police officer, stern but calm, headed into the bathroom. Mr. Patrick followed him. In the bathroom, under the light, everything was clean. The vent grill lay on the floor, but the ceiling itself was intact. The floor was damp, but from steam. The tile was unharmed. No cracks, no mud, no traces of small feet. "Ma'am," the officer said, returning, "there's no sign of a break-in." The grill simply fell. But the camera, Jess showed him the small device she was clutching in her hand. The officer took the camera, examined it, and frowned. "This, ma'am, is a humidity detector. Exhaust fans are often equipped with them. It's yours." "No." "The message." Jess ran to the mirror and wiped away the remaining steam with her palm. The mirror was clean. There was nothing on it. "Wait a minute," Mr. Patrick said, his voice worried. "Jess, when you came out of the bathroom, I saw you in the hallway. You looked very strange, and you yourself were holding something in your hand and smearing it on the mirror." "What?" Jess turned to him. "When you leaned against the door to listen, I saw you through the crack. You tapped the tile with your own finger and then came out. And you, Jess, smeared something on your hands and wrote that on the mirror." Jess's vision blurred. She didn't remember that at all. "And the strangest thing, Jess," Patrick continued, pointing to the slightly open bedroom door. "When you ran to the kitchen to get the knife, I saw this clearly. On the rug at the entrance to the bedroom lay a wet, viscous heap. It wasn't mud. It was wet fluff. It was your favorite soft towel," Patrick said quietly. "You tore it up, and inside it was an old child's doll you brought out of the closet. You were poking the doll into the floor and whispering something. The police officer looked closely at Jess, then at Patrick, then at the small camera detector in his hand. "Ma'am," the officer said, "we'll check the lobby cameras, but I think you need a doctor." At that moment, Jess looked at the humidity detector in the officer's hand. On its side, under the bright light, she saw that same greasy fingerprint. But it wasn't a gorilla's finger. It was hers, and then she understood. "Next time, check the vent." It wasn't a warning from an observer. It was a message her subconscious left for herself when she was in a trance, so that her rational self would find this camera detector and realize she was losing her mind. Everything she had seen was the product of extreme nervous exhaustion and hallucinations. The tapping on the tile, she was tapping. The message on the mirror, she wrote it. The children's tracks and jokes, the ripped towel and the old doll. She was her own pursuer, observer and victim. Jess collapsed to her knees, and the only thing echoing in her ears was the quiet, delayed echo of the tapping she seemed to have heard before. The thudding of her own heart, beating against her ribs. Jess wasn't just lonely, she was isolated. It all started a year ago when she moved into this apartment after a terrible divorce. Her husband, Andrew, was obsessed with the idea of the perfect home. He insisted on buying this old apartment only because it had potential for structural modification. He dreamed of tearing down walls, expanding the space, and creating an airy, open world. But Jess didn't want that. She felt safer in old, small, confined rooms. The divorce was messy. Andrew constantly told her that she was suffocating him, that her fear of open spaces and her childish quirks ruined their marriage. He eventually left, taking all the savings and leaving Jess with the mortgage and an overwhelming sense of guilt. Then followed a series of small but traumatic events. Job loss. She was fired for inability to work in a team, which amplified her sense of isolation. The flood. Neighbors upstairs flooded her bathroom. When she called a plumber, he said that in the old house everything was rotten and the bathroom floor was holding up literally by a thread. That phrase became her nightmare. She started constantly listening to the floor. The old doll. She inherited a beloved old eyeless doll from her grandmother. Jess hid it deep in the bedroom closet because the doll reminded her of a childhood spent hiding from the world. The final straw was an attempted reconciliation with Andrew. A week ago he called, not to apologize, but to announce that he was getting married and wanted Jess to sign papers to sell the apartment. "I'm tired of your prison, Jess. You need an open world or you'll rot in those walls." Those were his last words. These words hit her like a hammer. The feeling that her prison, her apartment, was being destroyed, that her last bastion of safety would be torn down, escalated into acute psychosis associated with a paranoid fear of destruction and surveillance. Her mind began to construct an absurd, yet logical version of events. Observer hallucinations. Andrew wanted her to open her eyes. Her brain created the observer in the vent, eyes watching her prison and trying to force her to check the open space, the vent. The horror of the floor, the threat of the floor collapsing, mentioned by the plumber, generated the hallucination of small, crawling things. If she's rotting in the walls, then those who are doing it must be under the floor. The tiny childlike hands are a sublimation of her unwillingness to grow up and leave her fortress. The knocking, her own self's attempt to break out. First on the tile, a reminder of the plumber. Then on the wood, self-destruction of the closet. While she was in the shower, her mind, at the peak of stress, triggered a self-protection, self-punishment mechanism, compelling her to write the message on the mirror. Subconscious. Warning. Remove the grill, the first step toward opening up. Take the old doll out of the closet, the last childish quirk. tear up the towel and smear it with grime to create proof of the floor's destruction. Jess was trapped, but not from the outside. Her own mind had built a prison of fears for her, and then made her believe that the walls and floor had come alive to destroy her. Just as Andrew predicted, her terror was 100% real, but 100% illusory, triggered by the words that she would rot in those walls.